I am a servant at the wedding in Cana, and this is my story. The morning of the wedding, the sky over the Galilean hills was the color of new wine, pale gold bleeding into rose, and I remember thinking it was a fitting color for a day meant to be sweet. My hands smelled of crushed mint and lamb fat before the sun had even cleared the ridge. I had been up since the fourth watch, helping haul the last baskets of bread from the ovens, and my back already ached in that low, familiar way that told me the day would be long before it had properly begun. I was not born to serve at feasts. I was born to a family who once had land, until debt swallowed it the way the sea swallows a stone. My father sold my service to a household in Cana when I was a boy, and I grew from a frightened child, sweeping courtyards, into a man who knew how to carry 6 water jars without spilling a drop, how to read the mood of a room before a single guest complained, how to disappear into a corner so completely that people forgot a servant was even present. That is a skill, disappearing. You learn it, or you suffer for not knowing it. Weddings in our village were not small things. They could stretch 7 days, sometimes more, and the honor of the family was bound up in every cup poured and every guest fed. To run out of anything, bread, oil, wine, was not a small embarrassment. It was a wound that would be spoken of for years, whispered about at wells, remembered at every future gathering of that family's name. A bridegroom who could not provide for his guests was a bridegroom who had shamed his household before the whole village. I had seen it happen to another family 2 years before when the meat ran short. They never fully recovered their standing. I did not want to see it happen here. By midday, the courtyard was full. Lyres and a small hand drum kept a rhythm under the talk and laughter, and I moved between the tables with jugs balanced against my hip, refilling cups, catching fragments of conversation. A farmer boasting about his olive press, 2 women comparing the weave of their head coverings, children darting between the legs of reclining men, chased by an old dog who had clearly attended more weddings than I had. Somewhere near the head table sat a woman I recognized by sight, though I did not know her well, a quiet, watchful woman named Mary, and near her a group of men who had arrived only recently, dusty from the road, one of whom carried himself with an unusual stillness, as though he were listening to something the rest of us could not hear. I did not know his name yet. I only noticed him because he thanked me quietly when I filled his cup. A small thing, but servants notice the small things. Most men do not see us enough to thank us. It was somewhere in the heat of the afternoon, when the wine had been flowing freely for hours and the second day of feasting was well underway, that I felt the first cold prickle of dread. I was refilling a jar from the storeroom when I noticed the master of the feast, the man appointed to oversee the meal, tasting each dish, judging the flow of the courses, pull one of the household stewards aside with a face gone tight and pale. I strained to hear without seeming to listen, a servant's oldest trick. "How much is left?" the steward whispered. "None," came the answer. "The skins are empty." I felt my stomach drop the way it does when you misstep on a dark stair. No wine, not low, gone. And the feast not yet half finished, with guests still arriving, still expecting, still watching. I thought of the bridegroom, a young man I had glimpsed earlier that day, glowing with the particular joy of a man who cannot believe his fortune. His bride veiled beside him, both of them unaware, still laughing at something one of the guests had said. I thought of his father, who had spent months preparing, who had pledged his household's honor on this celebration. And I thought, with the strange selfishness fear breeds even in the humblest heart, of what would happen to us, the servants, when the shame fell. Blame runs downhill. It always finds servants at the bottom. I do not know how the woman named Mary came to hear of it before the bridegroom's own family did. Perhaps she too had learned to listen at the edges of rooms. But I saw her rise from her place and cross to where the man with the still, listening face reclined among his companions. I was near enough, refilling a jug at the low table beside them, to hear her voice, low and certain. "They have no wine," she said. I remember thinking, foolishly, and what is that to him? He was a guest, as far as I knew. A traveler, a rabbi perhaps, one of many such men who passed through Galilee with a handful of followers, trailing behind like ducklings after their mother. What could a guest do about an empty wineskin? He looked at her, and something passed between them that I did not have the vocabulary yet to name. Not irritation exactly, though his words carried a formality that surprised me. "Woman, what does this have to do with me?" he said. "My hour has not yet come." I busied myself with the jug, ashamed to be caught listening, and yet unable to stop myself from watching from the corner of my eye. Mary did not argue. She did not press him or explain herself further. She simply turned toward us, toward the servants standing near the storeroom door, and said the words that would rearrange the rest of my life, though I did not know it yet. "Do whatever he tells you." She said it plainly, the way you might tell a child to mind an elder, and then she returned to her seat as though she had done nothing more remarkable than remark on the weather. But something in the certainty of her voice lodged itself in my chest like a hook. I had served at 100 feasts. I had never heard a guest's mother, for that, I would later learn, is what she was to him, speak with such quiet, unshakable confidence about a man who had, as far as I could see, done nothing at all. I looked at the other servants. Old Nathaniel, who had served this household for 30 years and had a face like sun-cracked earth, caught my eye and gave the smallest shrug, the universal servant's gesture that means, we do not understand, but we obey, because obedience is what has kept us fed. I want to be honest with you. In that moment, I did not feel faith. I felt the practical, weary resignation of a man with no better options. What did we have to lose? The wine was already gone. Shame was already a hand's breadth away. If a strange guest wished to occupy himself with empty water jars while the whole household waited for disaster, what harm could it do? He rose. I remember the unhurried way he moved, as though the panic gathering at the edges of the courtyard had not touched him at all. He walked to where 6 stone water jars stood against the wall. Enormous things, each able to hold 20 or 30 gallons, kept there for the ceremonial washing our law required before and during meals. They were, by that hour, mostly empty, drained by 100 hands rinsed clean throughout the long feast. "Fill the jars with water," he said. I stood there a moment, waiting for more, for some herb to be added, some word spoken over them, some hidden reason this act would matter. None came, just those 6 words, plain as bread. So we filled them. I will not pretend it was a swift or dignified task. The well was some distance from the courtyard, and 6 jars of that size meant trip after trip, the rope biting into my palms, the bucket splashing cold water down my forearms, my sandals slapping against packed earth already softened by an afternoon of dancing feet. My arms burned. Sweat ran into my eyes, and I wiped it away with a wrist already wet from spilled water. Nathaniel grumbled good-naturedly beside me about his old knees, but he did not stop hauling. None of us stopped. There is a strange dignity in obedience, even obedience you do not understand. Perhaps especially obedience you do not understand, because it costs you something before it ever shows you why. I confess my mind wandered as I worked, the way minds do during hard labor. I thought of my father, who had once told me that faith was not a feeling, but a walking. You do not wait to feel certain before you take the next step. You take the step, and certainty sometimes follows, sometimes does not, but the step is required regardless. I had not understood him fully as a boy, hauling water toward jars that could not possibly save this feast. I understood him a little better. We filled them to the brim, every one. He had not asked for that, only that we fill them. But something in me, in all of us, felt that half measures were not fitting for whatever this was. When the last jar stood full, the surface trembling slightly with each footstep nearby, he turned to us again. "Draw some out now," he said, "and take it to the master of the banquet." Here my heart nearly failed me. Draw water and serve it as though it were wine to a man whose entire office was to judge the quality of what was served? I glanced at Nathaniel. His face had gone carefully blank, the look of a man who has decided to obey even while his mind screams warnings. I dipped a pitcher into the nearest jar, and it went in easy and cold, exactly as water should. I will try to describe what happened next as plainly as I lived it, because I have turned it over in my memory 10,000 times since, searching for some trick of the eye, some moment I could point to and say, "There, that is where it changed." I never found one. I only know that I lifted the pitcher, and the weight of it in my hand was different than water's weight. Not heavier exactly, but fuller, if that makes any sense to you. A dark red crept through the liquid as it caught the afternoon light, slanting through the courtyard awning, and a smell rose from it that made my mouth flood before my mind caught up to what my senses already knew. It smelled of crushed grapes and something warmer beneath, cedar almost, or dark honey. My hand shook carrying that cup to the master of the feast. I do not embarrass easily after years of service, but I confess I nearly stumbled on the threshold, certain that I was about to serve a man water and be beaten for the insult, or worse, be the final humiliation heaped upon a bridegroom's disastrous day. He drank. I watched his face the way a condemned man watches a judge. His eyebrows rose. He drank again, slower, rolling it as men do who know wine the way shepherds know sheep. Then he set the cup down and called for the bridegroom himself, and I heard him say, loud enough for those nearby to hear, words that have never left me. "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink, but you have saved the best till now." The bridegroom's face was pure confusion. He had no idea what had happened, no idea that his household had stood at the very edge of ruin an hour before. Only we knew, only the servants who had hauled the water, whose backs still ached, whose sandals were still damp from the well. We stood near the storeroom wall, and I looked at Nathaniel, and Nathaniel looked at me, and neither of us said a word because there were no words yet built that could hold what we had just witnessed. I have thought often, in the years since, about why it was given to servants to know, not to the master of the feast. He tasted the wonder without ever seeing its source, not to the guests, laughing and drinking, unaware they were swallowing a miracle. Only to us, the ones who had done the small, unglamorous, unrewarded work of hauling water in the heat of the day. I have come to believe that God often hides his greatest workings inside the plain obedience of ordinary people, and that those who do the humble task with a willing hand are sometimes given a window into glory that the comfortable never see. I still carry water for a living, though not in that house anymore, but I carry it differently now. Every jar I fill, I remember that obedience without understanding is not foolishness. It is the very shape faith takes before it has words for itself. I remember that shame and lack can stand at the very threshold of a celebration, and still, quietly, without announcement or thunder, something greater can already be walking toward the door. And I remember a woman's voice, calm as still water. Do whatever he tells you. I have tried, every day since, to live as though I actually believe that is good advice. If you find yourself this day hauling water that seems to serve no purpose, doing the plain and unnoticed task with no promise of reward, take heart. You do not always see, in the moment of your obedience, what is being made of it. But the one who asked you to fill the jars is the same one who can turn what you carry into something that outlasts the feast and outlasts you telling of it. If you have been blessed by this story, subscribe, like, and share it with a friend.